With Jeff Parker of the anthologies America, Russian Writers View the United States, and Raskazi, New Fiction from a New Russia, and he is a winner of both the NEA and Guggenheim Fellowships. An original member of the underground Samizdat movement, Iossel came to the United States from the Soviet Union in 1986, and his short fiction has appeared widely and somewhat indiscriminately. His short stories have been anthologized in Best American Short Stories. His Facebook updates are regularly republished in The New Yorker. He is also the founder and executive director of Summer Literary Seminars, inarguably the largest and most important international writing conference in the world. The impetus for creating SLS, Misha says, was one of those enterprises that starts on a lark, emerging out of the desire to return to Russia and to bring with him a small creative writing program where there was none. There exists, Misha says, a kind of overriding interest, a commonality of the writer's experience. Writers, he says, are not always easy to be around, but they're interesting. Thus, Mikhail found himself the genius/arbiter/visionary of the International Writing Conference writ large, uniting writers of all backgrounds and home planets in places like Russia, Lithuania, Canada, Kenya. When I think about Misha's conference, where I was a student 15 years ago, I think about sitting on the steps of the Kazan Cathedral in St. Petersburg, listening to the fiction writer Robert Coover giggling over a student's woes about trying to buy really good toilet paper. I think about sitting on a floor in a small warm room off of Nevsky Prospect, the gigantic street that carved St. Petersburg in half, listening wine-drunk to Russian poetry. I think about walking through the gilded Winter Palace with the fiction writer Amy Bender at my heels, observing that it was, quote, pretty good for a palace. Most of all, I think about Misha. I think about him taking me late one night to the St. Petersburg police station after my wallet with Willie Nelson on it was stolen at a game of foosball. I think about Misha entertaining me by reading me selections out loud from The Onion. Why does Marlon Brando keep playing fat characters? Mothership accidentally descends on Hootie concert. Taco Bell launches new morning after burrito, and casual one-nighter gives Strom Thurmond change of heart on gay issue. I think about walking with Mikhail upstairs to meet the chief of the St. Petersburg Police and staring at the Baltica beer bottles, which are rolling out from the chief's closet as he composes this police report with the slowest Cyrillic I have ever seen known to man. And I think about after, 3 hours of this, Mikhail himself tipping back in a rickety wooden chair and somehow snoozing while the chief's radio is loudly squawking out Christina Aguilera. I think about meeting these two guys, Jeff Parker and Yosef Novakovich, and I realize now that, without Misha, there perhaps might not be any of this. Like, I might not have these friends. I might not have this job. Like, there might not even be a UT MFA. What if Jeff Parker had not gone to Russia and met Mikhail Yosef? It's like a terrifying vision of that movie Sliding Doors, with Gwyneth Paltrow. I don't know whether writers are by nature generous people, but I do know that when I think about what Mikhail Yosef has given all of us, I think about his painfully and often hilariously acute stories of Russia. I think about this, but I also think about his truly extraordinary gift of community. What is a writing community if not the opportunity to be your best kind of alive? Please help me to welcome to the stage the astonishing Mikhail Yosef.
And, after this introduction, I have nothing else to say, and I'm done. So, my name is Mikhail Iossel, as it says on the marquee. The key word is loss. Well, thank you for coming here instead of preparing to listen to Obama's State of the Union address. Mine will be shorter. I was actually thinking last week, while speaking of something else in class, that a week from today will mark the 30th anniversary of my coming to the United States, immigrating from the Soviet Union, and that means that my life is cleaved exactly in half by that, and so the moment of my departure from the Soviet Union is equidistant from now and from my birth. And I have to tell you that the first part of my life is remembered better, stronger somehow, even though we all left the Soviet Union with the notion that this is our second life, the first is over, and so you're born from scratch. But it doesn't happen that way. As children, we of course see everything for the first time, and as we grow up, everything becomes remembrance. So that's why we live our most important years in the first half of our lives. So let me read you, don't think about it too hard. It's I want to take you exactly 30 years ago, and I'll read you just one sentence. But it's a long sentence, and it's about one evening at the underground Samizdat Literary Club. Samizdat means self-publishing, and it's an acronym of Samizdal, self-publishing. And I was a member of that group called Club 81. Well, guess the year it was founded. And it was a very interesting and a very important period in my life. And it's dedicated to the memory of someone who was very important in my life and the life of many young people and young writers and poets in Leningrad, and that's Arkady Dragomoshenko. So Jeff knows him, of course. Well, he's died back in 2012. And Jeff knew him, and Yosef knew him, of course, and I don't know who else knew him, but somebody knew him. Remember how 30 years ago, yes, after the requisite sum of money had been collected in half handfuls of small change and occasional crumpled rubles, for however many bottles could be afforded of whatever toxic domestic ersatz sport of esophagus singeing Bulgarian dry red might be available that night at the basement liquor store diagonally across the darkly illuminated prospect, 5 tall floors below, and then, after the eager young person dispatched to fetch the booze had returned to the loft however many long minutes later, laden with bottles, winded but happy and greeted with discordant cheers, and then after we all of us, wasting no time, had gathered around the massive and incongruously sturdy table in the middle of the otherwise desolate and unlivable mansard building where we had our nightly gatherings, and the first 2 bottles had been opened quickly and expertly and without the use of a corkscrew, and their fetid contents had been poured out into the dense assemblage of thick, faceted railroad tea glasses and dainty mayonnaise jars and cheap china teacups with chipped edges amid the flowering of dentally challenged Leningrad smiles and the animated rubbing of hands, whereupon all of us would claim for ourselves one of those mongrel drinking vessels and take our seats on the motley assortment of rickety throwaway chairs and milk crates around that inexplicably elephantine table in the middle of the empty, dusty, decrepit loft space, and then, as if on cue, pause for a few beats, fall silent for a protracted instant or two, lifting our heads or turning or half turning to face the dark window all at once for no clear reason, strictly because of some unspoken and almost unpremeditated ritual, putting ourselves wholly in that moment with nothing preceding and nothing following, as it were. Well, do you remember how just then, as we were sitting there in that sprawling, empty, dusty, unlivable mansard loft with the scuffed, uneven floors and the cracked stucco walls and the exposed electrical wiring and all manner of disagreeable smells, inside that odd moment or two of hushed silence, not even dragging on the hard-beaten lighted Bellamores in our mouths before commencing to drink the night away there on the rooftop level of that uninhabited, condemned 5-floor building on Chernyshevsky Prospect, a stone's throw away from the vigilantly guarded U.S. consulate, to say nothing of the distance to the eponymous upscale metro station, partially visible from the loft's window at a sharp angle during the light time of day, which is to say never, since we never came there before dark or in the light time of year, and it was always very dark when it was dark in Leningrad back then. Yes, how we, all of us, a small gathering of momentarily silent, semi-underground young people seated around a massive rectangular table in the middle of a sprawling, empty, dusty loft up at the top of a condemned and otherwise unpeopled Dostoevskian building in the stark yellow light from a couple of bare light bulbs suspended from the concave cracked ceiling on twisted lengths of black cord. Yes, how we, all of us, momentarily silent and not even dragging on the lighted Bellamores in our mouths, peering intently out of the dusty and forever winterized, yet still drafty, cracked old window and into the immense, pitch dark outside, the unconquerable boreal Leningrad wintry darkness made darker still by the tiny yellow dots of thousands of windows and apartments, buildings near and far, just a small gathering of 10 or 20 of us, semi-underground and altogether inconsequential, prematurely young and childlike people between the ages of 20 and 40, peering in silence into that great and boundless yellow dotted darkness that enveloped our part of the vast and great and terrible country to which we solely belonged, the largest and darkest and strongest and strangest and most terrible country in the world, which we likely knew would never let go of us, never release its mortal grip on us, because it owned us by birthright, chapter and verse, body and soul, though mainly body, and in the end it probably would kill us too, just have us suffocate to death on its immense darkness and the unimaginable gravity of the black hole that it was, even if it was populated by hundreds of millions of people, our fellow citizens, whom we didn't really know or understand, even though we spoke the very same language and knew and understood anything and everything that there was to know and understand about them, which was both not much and an awful lot, the realization of which made us feel all cold and dark inside, though at the same time oddly comforted, frightened and petrified and awed and oddly comforted, still and silent in that yellow fish tank of the empty rooftop loft space, floating above the giant dark city at the top of a condemned uninhabited Dostoevskian building, peering out intently into that immense darkness, all of us at once, all of us silhouetted darkly and sharply in the harsh yellowness enveloping us, awed and frightened and oddly comforted, until one of us finally shook his head, horse-like, shaking himself out of the sheer catatonic strangeness of that momentary silence and immobility, and raised his drinking vessel, dragged on the Bellamore in his mouth, and said loudly and hoarsely, "Gentlemen, we are surrounded by a sea of darkness," thus signaling the end of that strange ritualistic intermission. And then, with much relief, we turned or took our gazes away from the dark window and, talking animatedly all at once, commenced to drink the night away. Let me read just a very short essay that I wrote for a memorial that is being built in, it's kind of raw, so I haven't read it before because I haven't reread it myself. So, memorial to the slain Jews of the town of Sheduva in northwestern Lithuania. And basically the whole country of Lithuania, and not only Lithuania, is full of shtetls and kind of little towns where the majority population was Jewish, but they were all killed. So 97% of them were all killed. And only now there are sort of like starting to honor their memory. So clouds like white whales, or zeppelins, if you will, in a somewhat ironic reference to the staple of the local national cuisine. Countless, they stand immovably above your head as if watching you coldly, dispassionately. The Baltic sky, a gelled reflection of itself in the sea below, is unlike any other you'll ever see. There is no way to describe it with any greater measure of precision. In a country too small to define its various geographic regions in terms of the conventional compass directions, that sky full of infinite cloud count is a country unto itself. One could say, at the bearable risk of sounding excessively literary, that metaphoric land of the immovable white clouds above is where the dead, and especially those unjustly killed in great numbers, dwell in uneasy peace. Those discreet, dispassionate white clouds above your head, they make you feel vulnerable somehow, and vaguely guilty too for the very fact of you being alive as you near the large village, small town of your destination, the site of the large groundbreaking memorial in progress to the many hundreds of its Jews, all of the places Jews in presence at the time, to put it simply, killed in the course of 2 days, some 74 years ago, not even a nanosecond in history's stopwatch, as you cross a sizable segment of the tiny East Central European country in question in the company of a prominent young local journalist, smart and cool and stylish, whom you've met before, and a bearded logistics fellow affiliated with the memorial along the diagonal distance of a little over 2 hours from the country's capital in a car driven by the genial man responsible for the implementation of the entire project on the ground. And then by means of a minor time lapse, you're there. It is, as one might expect, a large village, small town, like many others in this country, where virtually all of the Jews living there for many centuries were exterminated, not merely killed, exterminated, like some subhuman vermin variety, by the Nazi occupiers and a considerable number of their enthusiastic local accomplices and collaborators during the Holocaust. Now those Jews are being restored via said unprecedented memorial to the status of, well, to the status of human beings, once killed in a wholesale fashion for the simple reason of their being Jews. The memorial, already nearing its completion, consists of several essential parts. It is a complex, multidimensional endeavor with a two-pronged primary objective of honoring the terminated lives of local Holocaust-era Jews at the 3 sites of their actual extermination, as well as rejuvenating, if you will, bringing back to life the sprawling and long abandoned and decimated centuries-old local cemetery, Jewish cemetery, and indeed bringing back to life is the most one can do for a cemetery. And finally, building from scratch, for the first time in country's history, the Museum of Local Jewish Life as it once was and will never be again. Those clouds stand above your head and above the tall treetops, silently, sullenly in the dense and quiet local forest, where one of the memorial's installations represents a large black door pushed half ajar, standing in the exact spot where the local Jews, all of them, were brought over and exterminated quickly and efficiently and dispassionately with a hail of bullets. You stand on one side of the door and you're alive, for now. On the door's other side, however, the same slice of Sylvan Vista represents death, and the passage between life and death is strikingly, hauntingly narrow and arbitrary one, almost an accident, an afterthought. And it is, of course, but an accident of fate, a quirk of your minor personal little destiny that you, while being essentially the same as them, and effectively one of them, are standing now, 7+ decades later, on this sunny, safe, life-tethered side of the door, while those unlucky to have been born not that long before you and in a slightly different geographic locale were brought here, the spot you're standing at now, in backs of overpacked lorries, and were forced to line up and round together over there, just a bit yonder, on the other deathly side of that then unseen door, where they were then exterminated. A shiver goes down your spine. You can see them huddled, terrified people, having been forced to strip naked, the grown men and women, young and old, and children too, of course. One girl asks her mother in a small voice if it hurts when they kill you, and her mother says, shaking, that no, honey, it does not hurt, or maybe just a little, just a tiny bit, but then it will all be over very quickly, and we'll be together again forever, my love, and we'll forget all about today then, and we'll be happy. You can see them standing there on the other side of the imaginary and yet brutally real door, where the light somehow seems darker, starker, more severe, and vegetation looks sparser and crueler, although it is, of course, the very same day and the very same spot in the forest, just an optical illusion of a purely psychological provenance. A shiver goes down your spine, and the clouds above your head just keep watching you dispassionately. Such a thin line of fate's random drawing separates us from not us, life from death, the misfortune of being exterminated like lowly vermin from the comfort of peaceable and slightly maybe boring routine of our gradual accelerating process from birth to death. But then what else is new? So you just stand there, and at the time, unaware of its own existence, pauses in its passage. Right behind you, the project's main contractor, a worldly man roughly your own age, originally from this area, responsible for the timely realization of all the multifaceted works involved, continues on in an accented, halting Russian with his unhurried disquisition about the difficulties difficulty of managing workforce made up of local young people who have fallen out of the habit of diligent, conscientious labor, and in addition to being doubtless resentful of having to be building a monument to some unclear dead Jews they didn't personally harm in any way, are prone to heavy drinking and suicidal tendencies, vodka and killing oneself. Those are two big fashions trending here, he says flatly. Some of them announce in advance their intent to kill themselves, and they discuss their future details with their friends and co-workers with visible pleasure over a lot of vodka. It's perfectly routine here. Those clouds above your head, immovable, they accompany you almost all the way back to the country's capital. Shortly before you reach it, however, they slowly dissolve in the sky. Thank you.
Mikhail's grasp of syntax makes me very, very happy in a complicated way. Welcome to the 5th installment of our Lectores series. Once again, I'm Erica Dawson. Thanks to Jess Anthony for leading us off tonight. A little bit less of my voice is not a bad thing. Sometimes when you're planning a reading series of any kind for a residency or university or community or something like that, life gets in the way. And you have one author scheduled, and then Dennis Johnson throws his back out, and you have to dig into your Rolodex and find someone else. Gina Frangella was supposed to be here this evening, but wasn't able to make it. So on Christmas Eve, I sent Vanessa Blakeslee a very sort of sad, begging, pathetic email, and I was like, I know it's Christmas Eve and you're probably trying to like have fun, but please help me, please. And she was kind enough to say yes. I'm super excited to have her here with us tonight. Just a few years back, or maybe even less than that, she read for our undergraduates for one of UT's Writers at the University readings, and she visited my Poetics Forms class, which doesn't really make sense because she's a prose writer, but she's just that awesome that it made sense. And we continued the discussion after class in my office in Plant Hall, and so many students wanted to talk to Vanessa that they sat on the floor, they sat underneath benches that they dragged in from the hall so they didn't have to sit on the floor. And Vanessa did that thing where she says everything that you, the teacher, had been trying to say for a good 9 weeks, and they don't care when it comes from you, but when it came from Vanessa, it was solid gold. I like to think of her as solid gold. She's not only a good friend, she's part of what I like to call my Orlando family, centered around our relationship with our friend Ryan Revis's Borough Press, often traveling up and down I-4 to see each other. I admire everything about her, but perhaps most so her completely tireless dedication to her work as an artist. Her first novel, Juventud, was published last year by Curbside Press. It was hailed by Publishers Weekly as a tale of self-discovery and intense first love. Her story collection, Train Shots, which was published by Borough Press, won the 2014 IPPY Gold Medal Award in Short Fiction. Of Juventud, Patricia Henley, National Book Award nominee, says, "It's a harrowing international coming-of-age story. Juventud is unforgettable, erotic, and suspenseful." I like that, erotic and suspenseful. I was willing to follow the protagonist Mercedes anywhere, into Cali nightclubs, to her shooting lessons, into bed with her lovers, and to the dangerous activist meetings and rallies that mark a point of no return in her adolescence. This novel is part political thriller, part love story. It kept me up all night, and that's the highest praise. To add to that, Train Shots, which is an amazing collection of stories, has been optioned for a feature film, so many, many big things to come for Vanessa. Her work has appeared in awesome places like the Paris Review Daily, the Globe, and the Mail. She's had fellowships and residencies from Yaddo, VCCA, and lots of other amazing places. She's from Pennsylvania, but has been in Florida so long, I think that Florida can claim her as a Floridian, and maybe one of the 10 good things about the state of Florida. Ladies and gentlemen, Vanessa Blakeslee.
Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. It was so lovely. That may have been a frantic email on your part, but it was a pure pleasure for me to receive it. And it's just wonderful to be here. I attended Vermont College, so low residency programs are really near and dear to my heart. And I was really caught by something Mikhail said about that perspective of youth. I don't know how many of you are Spanish speaking, but juventud in Spanish means youth. And the novel is very much about how when things happen to us in our youth, we only have a certain perspective, a limited perspective, in how we see those events, and how later on in life, as we gain perspective as adults, we can see the greater context of what was really going on at the time. And so this is the situation for my narrator, Mercedes Martinez, who is a teenager in 1999 Cali, Colombia, when the novel opens. And she finds herself falling in love with a young man who's a very impassioned social justice leader and activist named Manuel. And she becomes more and more involved in this youth group, and some very tragic things occur as a result of her becoming involved, and just all of the atrocities that are coming to a head at that time with the paramilitaries, the guerrillas, and the Colombian government, and of course the narco-trafficking that is the book's socio-political backdrop. So I'm going to read two sections for you. One is just a very brief section that I think serves well to capture the mood of the novel and Mercedes' relationship with Manuel, and then a later scene with some of the major players in the novel who have gathered for dinner. And in writing this book, I very much was seeking to capture the global citizen of today. I was very interested in a protagonist who is from two cultures and really grappling with how you have a foot in two cultures. So Mercedes is half Colombian, but she is half American as well, and she's never met her mother, so that's also one of the mysteries of the novel. So, from Juventud. The ponytailed young man from the social justice meeting spoke, halting but convicted, from note cards. He turned out to be the leader of the Universidad de Valle peace organization. Then a priest, obese and commanding, led a prayer for Colombia and other nations that suffered atrocities. I had rarely thought about the world outside before, but now I pictured countries like ours in Africa and Asia with jungles, refugees, guns. I recalled the eyes of our desplazados and tried to guess at the numbers of people who lived that way on our planet. So many Colombias, countries I couldn't name, worlds without end. On stage, the same light shone in Manuel's eyes as when he lay back in bed with me, talking of his dreams, telling me that he loved me. I had thought that Manuel would speak to this gathering like he did at the youth group, but after the speeches concluded, Emilio led the demonstrators in a chant. Libertad, libertad, we cried in unison. From the back of the stage, Ana, Grazia, and I pumped our fists in the air, the flags fluttering in the breeze. Manuel said, "This is a song we want to play for anyone who worries," and the whistles and cheers died down. Manuel and Carlos began playing, voices soaring in harmony. The loudspeakers crackled. Thousands sang along. Ana wiped a tear from my cheek. I hadn't even realized it was there. Afterward, Manuel approached with his guitar case, rubbed the back of his head, and stretched. I liked his forearms, muscular from maneuvering furniture. Ana caught my eye, her brow raised. Time to leave. "Will I see you tonight?" I asked him. "Sorry," he said, "but I've got to stay and clean up, and I'm exhausted." He touched my chin. "Soon. I want to hear what happened with your father." I nodded, disappointed. I had hoped that we could at least meet in Anna's neighborhood for a walk before Fidel came to pick me up and the busy school week started. At the far end of the square, a few groups lingered, carrying on their chants for peace. Manuel kissed me goodbye, our fingers entwined. Someone called out for him. Was this how things would always be with us, his causes tearing him away? At last, I climbed down from the stage with Anna and Grazia, the two of them jabbering, and me silent. As we crossed the square, I marveled at how quickly its everyday filthiness had returned with the magical efficiency of a circus that had performed, dismantled, and left town. Nothing remained on the ground but some abandoned cardboard signs, a trampled miniature Colombian flag, and trash. So, as it's hinted at in that scene, Manuel has some interest in finding out about Mercedes' father, Diego, and through her involvement in the youth group, Mercedes comes to find out that her father does not have such a squeaky clean past. He's a player in the events of his country, just as these two brothers who are the peace activists are. And so the next scene I'm about to read is the dinner scene, and all you really need to know about this is that Manuel and Mercedes' father have met before, and there's a previous dinner scene where they first meet where things don't go very well, and you could just say that Diego, Mercedes' father, is not a fan of his daughter dating a very outspoken social justice activist, because of course this makes his daughter a target for assassination as much as it does Manuel. Manuel and his bike flew like a black fly along the valley road. The gate opened and the bike coasted into the courtyard, its rumble reverberating off the stonework and mosaics. It was Friday night. Manuel had ridden with his guitar case strapped across his back, something he didn't like to do as it wasn't safe, but he had reluctantly agreed. He swung the case down and stretched before he wrapped his arm around me. "Ready for the evening's adventures?" he whispered. The maids had set the table for 6. Manuel extended his hand to Poppy. "Thank you for inviting me back. I'm afraid I put you off last time, without meaning to." Poppy said, No, all is forgiven. Please, sit down. Tonight is all about music and good times." Underneath the table, Manuel squeezed my leg, searched for my fingers, and clutched them hard. Fidel strolled in, claimed the seat across from Uncle Charlie. "Captain," Uncle Charlie said in greeting Fidel, who improvised a quick salute in return, but flushed red and stared down, embarrassed. So they knew each other. Fidel had served in one of Uncle Charlie's little armies, if not under his direct command. I was waiting and hoping to see how Uncle Charlie would introduce himself to Manuel, but when they shook hands, he stuck by the nickname. I declined the aguardiente, the potent grain alcohol, too much for me, but Manuel poured himself a short glass. Inez set down 2 crystal serving bowls of ceviche, one of scallops and the other of shrimp. "Ah, the real Peruvian kind," Uncle Charlie cried. "Soaking it overnight in lime, that's the secret. Not like the slop they serve in these cheap places with ketchup and mayonnaise." "I am Peruvian, remember?" Inez patted his shoulder as she passed by. "For you, only the best." Citrus and fresh cilantro wafted up, mixed with the honey aroma of dripping wax. Luis lifted his plate, Uncle Charlie the ladle. The clear juice and pale chunks of seafood pooled onto plates. Manuel said, "Shall we say grace?" Uncle Charlie folded his fingers together loosely and glanced at Poppy, who set down his fork and did the same. Fidel bowed his head and sat up straight. Luis slouched and shut his eyes. Manuel recited a quick thank you to God. "I look forward to playing tonight," he said, picking up his fork. "I apologize beforehand if I'm rusty, but I've been distracted by other obligations lately, as you know." What a coincidence. So have I, Uncle Charlie said. But that is always the case. Sometimes I dream that I am alone on San Andres Island with a volume of Mario Benedetti's poetry in one hand and a beautiful whore in the other. Luis and Papi chuckled at this, although Fidel didn't even crack a smile. My apologies if I've offended you, Uncle Charlie said to us. Manuel smiled, tight-lipped, and raised his brows. My brother is studying for the priesthood, not me, he said. He took a bite of ceviche. Your brother, yes. What's the latest? Uncle Charlie said. The FARC killed my father when I was a young man, you know. To think you can't sit down at a table in this country without everyone having suffered some tragedy, all because of these cowardly thugs. The men chewed and stared down in silence. Luis cleared his throat, his face somber. He shoveled ceviche into his mouth, gazing off. The sun sank orange into the mountains. So he'd lost someone too. Maybe he acted boisterous and aggressive because he didn't know how else to deal with it. I lifted the water pitcher, offered him a glass. Sorry to hear that, Manuel said. What do you do now? I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to say. Uncle Charlie sipped his drink as if it was a fine wine, patting his mouth afterward. You might say I work behind the scenes. Right now, I'm tackling the problem you are facing, but from another angle. I never realized Mercedes had an uncle, Manuel said. His elbow brushed me, pressed into my blouse. Are you American? From her mother's side? Luis and Fidel burst into laughter at this, and Papi and Uncle Charlie chuckled under their breath and exchanged a private look of amusement, the way I had seen Manuel and Emilio share glances. Papi smiled behind his folded hands. He's not really her uncle, he said, but Charlie is a very old, very good friend. I hope you don't mind me asking this, Manuel began, but do you see a path for peace, or should we just forget it? Fidel's eyes appeared glassy, already midway through his second pour. The million-dollar question, he said, for the million-dollar man. Silence fell. Luis sucked down ceviche. I halved a scallop, and the slippery white flesh shot across my plate. Papi glowered at Fidel. Had the remark been intended as an insult? Uncle Charlie asked, Do you read, Manuel? Sure. Mostly theological books by Catholic writers and activists, Oriana Fallaci, Dorothy Day. But you don't read literature, poetry, fiction. Not really, he replied. In literature lives the heart of the human being, even more than religion, Uncle Charlie said. Don't get me wrong, I go to Mass. As he spoke, he popped shrimp between his lips. His teeth appeared too big for his mouth. Everyone sat up waiting to hear what he would say, myself included. Our great writer Garcia Marquez has said that Colombia is in the midst of a biblical Holocaust, and I believe he has it right. There are only 3 outcomes that can result from violence. One side will win out eventually and rise to power, or the sides will get tired of fighting and killing and drop their weapons, or lastly, the fighting will go on, fed as it is by the gringo appetite for drugs and the larger corrupt interests of the multinational corporations and U.S. government, until we have killed each other off, every last one. But which do you think is going to happen? I asked. I took a teeny sip of Manuel's aguardiente and coughed. Do you think I know? Uncle Charlie cried. I want peace, but at the same time, there are economic realities. We must defend ourselves, our families. His fist drummed the table. Isn't that playing both sides? Manuel asked. If you play both sides, you never lose, Papi said with a shrug. Ask the Americans. They've been doing that for years here and all over the world. Their citizens don't even notice. They're too busy getting high on our coca, Luis said. Exactly, Uncle Charlie said. And yet when we protect our farms, we're criminals? He and Manuel began to argue about the Americans' latest role in the drug trafficking. Papi wandered to the humidor. I took another sip, throat burning. How are you displaced? I asked Papi. What's this? Uncle Charlie interrupted. Poppy offered each of them a cigar, passed around the cutter. Only Manuel declined. Poppy lit his off a candle, slowly savored the first toke. He resumed his seat with legs crossed and touched his bandana, freshly pressed, in his shirt pocket. There's a camp in the lowlands, past the cane. I've let a few dozen displaced stay there in exchange for working the fallow fields. More like 100, Luis said, staring at the end of his guitar. And you will have more, Uncle Charlie said. That's good of you. St. Diego, see what I'm talking about? He looked at us, but reached over and thumped Poppy on the shoulder. That's very kind, Manuel said. He toyed with the cutter. So you believe in faith in action? What other type of faith is there? Poppy said. I wish I could offer them more. But we all do the best we can, don't we? A twinge of mockery hung on the words, quickly eclipsed by his suggestion that we move into the living room for the guitar show, if Manuel was ready. Manuel sat before the fireplace, patted the place beside him for me to join. As he strummed, the valley fell more deeply into darkness except for the glittering stars and scattered lights of small farms. Soon the jefes arrived, each stooping to fetch a beer at the mini-fridge Poppy kept stocked on the patio before ambling in. All wore guns at their waists. Uncle Charlie waved in his bodyguards. His reddish face turned even darker with the blood rushing to his capillaries. Should we wait for the girls? He slurred. The maids darted about, collecting glasses and emptying ashtrays, and the dogs cavorted and barked at the jefes who tossed toys for them. The men leaned in the doorway and against the couches. Wiry Vincente, rolled cigarette hanging from his thin lips. Guillermo, with the high cheekbones and indigenous features of Inez, ceviche piled onto his plate. Fidel, the youngest, sulky from too much drink, Uncle Charlie, or both. Luis, who laughed a lot but adjusted himself and poked his head outside to spit in the lawn when he thought no one was watching. And Uncle Charlie, the latest addition, who now sat in Poppy's chair across from us with his hands clasped upon the arms and his feet flat on the ground, like a gentleman about to watch an opera or a king. All of them different versions of Poppy. Headlights flashed and gravel crunched underneath tires. The maid threw open the front door. A half-dozen women pranced in. One wore the highest heels I had ever seen, her shimmery camisole straining to cover her augmented breasts. From the wrinkles in her cleavage, she appeared to be the oldest. Another wore jeans so tight that the crack of her backside peeked out the top. A dainty tattooed tree frog leapt beneath the strap of her hot pink thong. She paraded around like a cat, proud of her sleek, thick tail. The prettiest had straight black hair that swung down her back and a beauty queen smile that gleamed when she sidled up to Guillermo and stole a forkful of ceviche off his plate. No doubt she knew the tricks Anna knew, how to rub Vaseline on your teeth and coconut oil in your hair. She couldn't have been more than 19 or 20. I hope you don't mind, Uncle Charlie said, but I called some friends. He spoke sloppily, swept his arm toward the bar where the women poured one another aguardiente. Poppy loitered in the kitchen, talking to Inez as she scrubbed. Manuel pinched my knee, and I flushed. Who are they? I whispered. Who do you think? He scoffed. Prostitutes. Then he began to play. Everyone fell quiet. Poppy hurried over and slipped into the chair beside Uncle Charlie, face smooth and fixed upon us. Putas. Did my father go to bed with such women? And was this the kind of behavior that had driven my mother away? What was the relationship between Poppy and Charlie for this bizarre old friend to waltz in, bunk with us for however long he liked, and order prostitutes at his leisure? Manuel played for about an hour, intricate classical pieces, lively rumba numbers, plus his own compositions. When the most recent round of applause died, Manuel took my hand and said, I wrote this last song for the love of my life. Whistles and murmurs erupted. Poppy shifted, chin in his palm and his other hand clenching the bandana. Manuel played a new song he had sung for me once in the brothers' bedroom. The faces remained still still under the soft lamplight, the maids and Inez standing in the back, arms folded. Fidel hastily wiped a tear. Guillermo stared down into his drink, entranced. As the last notes reverberated, Uncle Charlie looked like he'd just closed the covers of a wonderful book. "You have inspired me to double my efforts against the ELN on your behalf," he said. "My brother Carlos and I were going to record this month," Manuel said. He arranged the guitar in its case. "But that's all been put on hold now until we get Emilio released." A thick cloud of perfume filled my nose and mouth. The prostitute with the enormous breasts hovered over Manuel, praising his performance. Vincente behind her, extending his hand, grinning and nodding enthusiastically. His other hand rested on the woman's lower back, her skin too tan, even in the dimmed light. Guillermo and Luis crowded around, and then the others. Only Papi and Uncle Charlie remained seated. That's when Uncle Charlie leaned over to Papi and whispered, "You weren't kidding about his talent or his potential." I stood there, passing around Manuel's CD and meeting the women's envious glances, straining to hear my father's reply. "Que encantador," the pretty one with the shiny teeth said to me, tilting her head toward Manuel. I complimented her tacky purse, pretended to listen as she prattled on about where to get designer knockoffs. Potential. Did Papi view Manuel not as a threat, but someone he might win over to his employment, like Fidel? I backed closer to the couches, but heard nothing more. When at last I broke away, Uncle Charlie had left. I started to breeze past Papi, but he caught my side. Tears glistened in the creases of his eyes. Bandana crumbled on his knee. I grabbed his other hand. "I love you so much," he said, voice trembling. He squeezed my hand so hard that it hurt. "I'm sorry I'm not a better man." "You're fine," I said. "I love you too." My throat tightened, and to my surprise, I said, "Like you said, we all do the best we can." A bitter cigar haze clouded the downstairs, and Shakira's Suerte rollicked the speakers. I coaxed Manuel outside, shut the din behind glass. On the couch, Uncle Charlie sat wide-legged, hugging two women, their shirts unbuttoned and bras exposed, the one with the tree frog tattoo and one of our maids. He groped her white pants, and she scolded him, wielding her cup of guaro overhead, the two of them laughing. "I sort of like him," I said, nodding over my shoulder. "Uncle Charlie." "Of course you do," Manuel said. "He charms people. I know his type, and he's dangerous." The grass chilled my ankles as we descended the lawn for the stable, the noise of the house falling distant. My father had disappeared. Had he gone upstairs to bed, alone? I didn't see the young one with the glossy hair anywhere. Was he with her? The stallion whinnied and snorted, knocking around his stall. "We have a flair for finding ourselves in the company of animals," Manuel said, bemused, "in more ways than one." He stared into the dark foothills, traded the guitar case from one hand to the other. "I should go," he said. I knew he was worried about Emilio, wondering if someone had called with a message, even at that hour. I begged for him to stay. He shook his head, dug out his keys. At the paddock fence, we kissed. The horses stamped their goodnights. Thank you.
So if you can believe it, it's already Tuesday night, which means that the calendar is getting away from us. But tomorrow night we are in for a treat. We have my MFA friend, Joe A. Strike, who is Jason's colleague at Coastal Carolina. He will be reading with our own Stefan Kiesboo. And if Stefan isn't wearing some sort of hat, I might fire him. And I also hear that there's a little music involved and a little extra special music involved, so we can look forward to that. And then Thursday night, of course, Patricia Smith will end everything for us, and we'll go off happy and merry and maybe a little sad, but we'll still like it. Have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow.